Okay, I can see that we've got people starting to come into the room, so I think we are ready to get started. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I am Todd Humber, the publisher for HR News Canada. Just a couple of quick notes before we get started and hand the mic to our friends over at Queen's University IRC. The audience today, you are in listen-only mode. That means we cannot hear you or see you, but we definitely want to hear from you. There is a Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom webinar control panel. You can drop a question there at any time. We're going to have some time at the end to answer questions from the audience. Secondly, we are recording today, so you're going to get a copy of this recording in your inbox to watch on demand. That should come early next week, so keep an eye out for that. It'll be sent to the same email that you used to register. So now it is my pleasure to introduce Lindsay Van Zylen, who's the Sales and Marketing Manager at the IRC, who will help kick off today's session and introduce our panel. So Lindsay, as always, good to see you, and over to you.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for the lovely intro there, Todd. Great to be here with everyone today, and I'm very excited to be here on behalf of Queen's University IRC. So maybe just before we dive into today's session, I'd like to first acknowledge that Queen's is situated on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee First Peoples Territory. We make this statement in an act of reconciliation, honoring the land and Indigenous presence here, which dates back over 10,000 years. We're grateful to be able to live, learn, and play on these lands. For those who may be hearing about us for the first time, Queen's University IRC is a leading provider of professional development programs in labor relations, human resources, and organization development. For over 89 years, almost 90, can't believe it, we've been helping workplace professionals across Canada move from insight to workplace impact through really practical, practitioner-led learning experiences that focus on today's evolving workplace challenges. We offer virtual and in-person programs all across Canada, so you can learn from anywhere, but we also offer virtual programs and custom training solutions for organizations. Now, please join me in welcoming your speakers for today, Lola and Wylie. Lola is an accomplished, results-driven HR and healthcare executive and Vice President of People, Culture, and Organizational Effectiveness at a regional healthcare organization. With nearly 20 years of experience across the private, public, and not-for-profit sectors in England and Ontario, she brings deep expertise in culture, people leadership, and organizational effectiveness, and is a strong advocate for equity, diversity, and inclusion. She holds a Bachelor of Science honors degree in economics and statistics and a Master's of Science in human resources management. She is designated with CHRE, CHE, CAPM, and MCIPD. She's a mom and a wife, and she's almost finished, I believe, her Global Executive MBA at Rotman. And she also serves on a board of governors for a private school. Lola leads two of Queen's IRC's programs, HR Metrics and Analytics, and our Aligning HR and Business Strategy program. Over to Wylie now. Wylie is an innovation consultant, educator, and leadership coach with over 15 years of experience in business administration, HR, organizational design, strategic and operational planning, and leading high-performing teams. She's a leadership coach through the University of Toronto Centre for Learning and Leadership. Wylie has worked with organizations such as the United Way, CIBC, and Sick Kids in leading cultural transformations and large-scale change strategies. She's passionate about unleashing potential and specializes in aligning strategy with organizational structure and creating sustainable, people-centered solutions. Wylie holds an MBA from Queen's University, an honors sociology degree from York University, and is an Adler-trained coach. Wylie leads three of Queen's IRC's programs, our AI-powered workforce planning, managing workplace conflicts, and our talent management program. So without further ado, I'd like to hand the session over to our facilitators for today.
Thank you, Lindsay. That was a mouthful. So thank you so much for such a lovely introduction. Thank you, Todd, for having us here. I'm thrilled to be here today, and I am so thrilled to be co-presenting with my esteemed colleague and friend, Lola. I hope you will find some great insights today in the time that we have. I'm going to spend the next 25 minutes talking to you about strategic workforce planning, and then I'm going to hand the baton over to the lovely Lola, who's going to talk to you about people data. What I'm hoping we can tackle today in the time we have is really understanding, the evolution of strategic workforce planning. Why is it so important? Why do we keep hearing about, organizations putting this real spotlight on strategic workforce planning? And then I just want to talk a little bit about what are some of the levers, the best practices that we're seeing emerging out of strategic workforce planning, really in relation to the technological change that we're seeing through AI. So that's what we've got on tap for you today. And then we're hoping to carve out some time at the end for a Q&A. So as Todd mentioned, we want to hear from you. So please pop those questions into the chat, and Todd's going to help facilitate that Q&A at the end. So we promise to give you some time to do that. So let's get ourselves grounded in some shared language when we're talking about strategic workforce planning. What is it that we mean? So strategic workforce planning really connects your business strategy to your people decisions. So you're anticipating talent risks and building future ready skills to really ensure that you're making the right kinds of decisions. So for me, what I think about with strategic workforce planning when we're talking about this sort of disruption, the technological disruption and AI and automation, I really think that the HR proposition is evolving and changing. And I think at the heart of what we're going to see happening with HR is really around this work as it relates to strategic workforce planning. So we know, for example, all of the white collar jobs, are going to be impacted by augmentation and automation. There's different stats, and I think none of us have a crystal ball in terms of really understanding where this is going to land. But with regards to HR specifically, some of the stats come in at between like 50 and 80% of HR roles are going to be shifting and changing as it relates to AI. So as this starts to happen, we're going to need to think about, what is it that HR is doing and how are we structured and organized to support the business? And I really think of it in terms of the designing of work inside our organizations, and the designing of that work really does come with taking that technology, taking your humans and taking your business priorities and really doing a good job of mapping those things together. And so how can HR really lead this work through best practice and through the right kind of partnership inside the business to be able to do that well? So I think, again, that is why, we're seeing this big sort of spotlight on strategic workforce planning right now because of all this transformation that's happening. Continuous transformation. We're operating in continuous change. I just read an article last week that was talking about the framing of change management, changefulness, and so that change management isn't necessarily a disruption that happens at one time. It's like inside our organizations, we need to learn how to adapt to change constantly. So I thought that was really interesting. When we're talking about AI and automation, even the LLM, so those large language models that were all, landed on our laps in 2023. So now we're seeing this, there's going to be this next wave of AI because those large language models are reaching their capacity now for what they can do. And so what is this next wave of AI? So we're talking about agentic AI, where we're actually going to have AI employees, and that's already started to roll out in different organizations. And then world models, and these world models that are actually going to be very predictive, and they have the capability where large language models are really good at sort of, language, predicting the next sentence, rewriting, summarizing. These world models actually are able to understand the dynamics of physics. And so they're going to be able to really create these, real life scenarios for us. So that the level of sophistication with these tools is advancing again at a speed that our organizations aren't really able to absorb. And so how does that sort of um, impact the way that we do strategic workforce planning and understanding, how that work gets sort of separated between the employees and the technology, and then of course aligning it to business priorities. The shelf life of skills is shrinking. So where, historically you could have a set of skills that, you would have in your organization for 20, 30 years, it could be 6 months now where a skill is really highlighted, and then all of a sudden those skills are getting retired and new skills are coming in. Talent shortages, skills shortages, demographic shifts. So for those of us working in the public sector, we're anticipating a massive retirement happening as we see that youngest boomer generation coming up to retirement in 2030. So how is that going to impact our workforce? And then of course the cost of not doing it. So what are we doing when we're doing really good strategic workforce planning? We're really trying to make sure that we have a really good understanding of the talent inside our organization, and our talent gets so trapped in our organization. So how do we understand the depth of skill that we have inside our organization and build the mechanisms to make sure that we're able to deploy those skills effectively based on our business priorities? So before we move ahead, I wanted to do a little poll. This will be the first of two that we'll do today. So Todd's going to help us out here. And the question here is, what keeps you up at night about your workforce? So is that the skills gaps that you can't fill fast enough? Is it about AI changing roles faster than you can keep up with, not having reliable data to drive good decision making, getting leadership to take workforce planning seriously? So we'll just leave that here. Please take a minute to vote, and then Todd's going to share those results with us. Okay, so we're seeing it's actually pretty even across the board here. So basically what I'm hearing is all things are keeping all of us up at night as it's related to strategic workforce planning. Uh, yeah, so we're going to be touching on a number of these things today in terms of how we can actually address managing some of those skills gaps. We're going to be talking about data and the importance of reliable data. And I think part of that, when we're talking about getting leadership to take workforce planning seriously, it's really like, what is the burning platform, right? And what is the cost of not doing it well? And so how can you sort of deliver that business case to your leaders to help them understand the cost, as I said, of not doing it? So thank you, everyone. So, just kind of touching on the evolution of strategic workforce planning, because what we're really trying to do now is we're trying to build and shift the capability as it relates to strategic workforce planning. And so where has it been in the past? It's really been sort of a headcount exercise, right? And we see that, in terms of it being an annual exercise, very much tied to budget cycles, focused on FTEs and org charts, really just owned by HR. And it was reactive by design. And as I said, it's really sort of been a headcount exercise. And so what we're trying to do, and where we've seen this shift starting to happen, is really around, the internet, the World Wide Web, the technological advancements where we actually have had access to data and information in new and different ways. But where we've seen the evolution of this moving is really the importance of linking your strategic workforce planning directly to your business outcomes, right? So what is it that the business is trying to drive? What's it trying to achieve? And beyond that, you're also trying to understand, what do we have in-house today that aligns with those business priorities, but also what's happening in the external labor market that could impact our ability to bring in new talent. So you're doing things like environmental scans and really trying to get a better lay of the land in any of those things that could be really disruptive to your workforce. And so it moved in sort of between 2005 and 2018 to having some more sort of planning associated with it, being a little bit more cross-functional in terms of working with the businesses to help drive better outcomes as it relates to strategic workforce planning. And then we're really seeing this huge push right now that's more related to this sort of the intelligence within strategic workforce planning. So this is something that needs to happen continuously. We're using language now in the last few years that's really emerging around skills-based planning. How are we leveraging the technology and all that data to help us drive the right kinds of insights? And we're still we're layering on to what we have been doing in terms of, continuing to do those labor market scans, demand forecasting, etc. So we're really layering onto that. And then we're also moving into what is that predictive, based on, the history, based on some of that data, how do we do some predictive modeling to help us plan for multiple potential futures instead of just sort of one future and or being really reactive in that space. And so we're really relying on the technology and the data now to help us in terms of shifting into a more sophisticated approach as it relates to strategic workforce planning. So if we were to talk about this in terms of a framework, what are you doing when you're doing strategic workforce planning? As I said, you're always aligning it to the business strategy to start with. And oftentimes what happens, and all of us have been witness to or experienced this, strategy happens in a room somewhere in an organization, and oftentimes it's disconnected from understanding, do we actually have the capabilities to drive these outcomes? And so what we need when we're building our strategies is to actually have a clear understanding of what are the capabilities inside this organization that we have. And so, for example, if we wanted to do, a digital transformation in the next 5 years, where are we today in terms of having the right skills to be able to drive those outcomes? So we really need to do, the first step is always aligning your strategic workforce planning approach to what those business outcomes are. And so then you move into analyzing your current workforce, right? So you can do that in a number of different ways. You can do segmentation. So you could look at your core skills, your critical skills and or roles. You could look at demographics. So for example, for those of you who are in the public sector and you're anticipating, the great retirement in the next, 5 or so years, how might you actually segment, that demographic of retirees and starting to understand what the potential impacts to your organization might be related to that. You can do, geographic segmentation. You can look at turnover. So that's where you're analyzing your current workforce. Then you're forecasting future needs. So again, really grounded in that business strategy, depending on what it is that you want to do. What is the future needs inside the organization? Where are those capabilities? What are the skills that you need? This is all related to future-proofing your organization. So you're anticipating potential talent shortages. You're also trying to figure out where you have an overuse of skills and or what skills need to be retired inside your organization. And so then you get into your gap analysis, right? Of, where you're going, what you have today, and what does that gap look like? And when you have that gap analysis, you're using that to really build your plan. And that's, are you buying new talent? You're building new talent. It could be bought in BOT. So what part of the work could be augmented or automated through the use of technology. So you're then just planning on building that plan, and then you're coming up with that monitor and review cycle, right? That it's going to be regular, and you're doing this in partnership with the business, right? HR doesn't own this. You're doing this in collaboration with the business. And so I want to touch on a couple more things before I hand this over to Lola, just in terms of, what are some of these best practices that we keep hearing about as related to strategic workforce planning, and skills-based workforce planning is one of those things. What does this do for us when we have a better understanding of skills inside our organizations as opposed to roles or job titles, role titles? Skills gives us the kind of nuance and flexibility that we need inside our organizations, especially now that we're we have to be ready for that changefulness, as you know, that new terminology, ready to adapt all the time, ready to deploy and link that skill to the different priorities that are happening in your organization. It allows for fluidity, flexibility, and speed. So you're asking yourselves questions like, what are the skills we will need? Do we have them today? Where are you trying to access these skills? So you can start looking at some of the places and spaces that you have inside your organization, like your HRIS systems. The other thing is, you know, there's so many vendors out there, and people always ask me, you know, should we be buying bringing in a vendor? No, you don't. You know, the vendors will sell you the world, and we often fall in love with solutions, but we don't fall in love with the problem. So we don't need to spend a ton of money on a vendor who's going to help us with this. We can rely on some of the tools that we have in-house, as I said, like those HRIS systems. But if you're thinking about new roles that you might need or new skills that you need, you can start scanning places like LinkedIn and gathering those insights. Look at jobs descriptions on LinkedIn, and you can plunk those goodies into your AI tool and ask it to generate skills inventories for you, right? And so you don't need to create massive inventories, and you can just start. Again, I would say start where your most critical need is. So, what's the burning platform? Because you're not going to be able to do this for everyone and everything. You really want it to be strategic. So, it needs to be aligned to a business priority. But you're using your AI tools to help you do this work as much as possible. I'm going to just move on here for the sake of time. Scenario planning. So this is another really important sort of practice that you should be thinking about building into your strategic workforce planning approach. And so what this is really doing is helping organizations manage the multiple constraints that we're faced with, right? So that's the tech disruption, that's the skills gaps, that's the economic uncertainty. So it's hard for us to plan for just one future. What we need to get better at doing is planning for a multitude of futures. And that's what scenario planning is going to do for you. It's going to allow you to kind of think through what are all the sort of things that could emerge over the next 5, 10 years, over the next year, if you wanted to do it in that kind of time frame. So you want to understand what are the external dynamics that could influence your operating environment. You're using the AI tools, as I said, the new wave of AI tools, the world models. This is exactly what they're going to be doing. Is they're going to do really good job. They'll do a really good job of scenario planning, and they're really focused on predictive modeling. So then they help, right? When we're doing the scenario planning, it's going to help to define different strategic choices that emerge from the different scenarios. And it's going to help your organization come up with a response to what those different possible futures, what those might be. So you want to be able to manage your decisions today based on having some insights into what that future might look like. So just to go through a couple of examples here. So your organization is considering automating tier 1 customer service functions over the next 18 months. What are your 3 workforce scenarios? Scenario A would be full automation and the redeployment of affected staff. Scenario B would be partial automation, and that would be the hybrid kind of human and AI model that we've been talking about when AI agents, as I just mentioned. And then scenario C, where automation is going to be delayed and you're just focusing on training and investing in efficiency inside your organization. So what is the data that's going to feed your scenarios? First and foremost, always going to start with your strategy. And then you're going to layer in data that you have access to. So that could be data that's in your HRIS. It could be skills assessments, performance data, etc. So this is where you're plunking all of that into a tool and you're asking it to provide you with the likelihood of any number of scenarios. And then once you have those, you are tracking them, right? And you're setting up, when you're doing this work, you're setting up flags that will help you to see whether or not one scenario is emerging as more likely than another. And then you're going to activate your plan as related to that scenario. And I just want to say a couple things about data before I hand this over to the lovely Lola. The data governance for me was something, and I say this all the time, when back in my work career, data governance always was an IT issue. Data governance now is an everyone responsibility. We are all using data all the time to do our work. And so you really need to make sure that you are cleaning your data or understanding the integrity of your data, and your AI decisions, your AI work, only as good as the data behind them. We have an obligation, because the work that we're doing, especially in HR and strategic workforce planning, directly impacts the people and the human beings inside our organizations and their careers. So it really is incumbent upon us to make sure that we're using the right clean data if we're asking AI to help us in our decision making, because otherwise there's a whole downstream impact of what that means for our human beings if we're not taking the data governance piece of this work really seriously. Okay, thank you so much. I feel like we just did a speed round. I'm going to hand the mic over to the lovely Lola, and I'll be back to answer any questions in a few minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wylie, and thank you to Todd and Lindsay earlier on for the excellent introduction. Should I share my screen, Wylie? That's okay. Okay.
Sorry, Lola.
No, all good, all good. I'll just make sure everyone can see. Can you see my screen? And then I'll go from current slide. Let's see.
Yeah, looks good.
How am I looking now? Excellent.
You look perfect.
Thank you so much, Wylie. And so let me just jump off the point you made about data governance. AI, automation, and people data. People always ask me all the time, 100%. Can you use AI? Yes, but I would say yes and. The three things that I would generally just advise on really strongly, Wylie touched on it already. Governance frameworks, 100%. We have to have good governance frameworks in place that talk about privacy, ethics, all the usual stuff. The second thing is literacy and change management, because again, we can't ignore the fact that there are people involved in the use of AI. And then finally, the human in the loop, human factors, interoperability, all the good stuff. So when we're talking about people data and people metrics, I always get the question, oh, can we use AI? Yes, and then the three things I talked about. So welcome to this segment. And oh my God, Wylie, you've made my job so much easier. I'm just going to glide through, starting with the definition as well around the shared language. What is HR metrics? What is people data? Essentially, they're those workforce indicators that help us evaluate people-related trends. However, it should also help inform decisions, and it should help improve business outcomes. And then we'll talk about the why as we move along later on. So what is the problem with metrics today? My humble opinion, the problem with metrics is, we already collect people data. We collect sickness absence, we collect vacancy rates, we collect discipline information, grievance information. We know who's coming, who's going. However, the real challenge is that the data itself, we're not using it to influence decisions, to answer questions, or to change behaviors and or improve outcomes. So that's where the magic happens, when we have the ability to use the data we have to actually inform decision-making, change behaviors, or improve outcomes. So a lot of times I see, the people data or the HR metrics, is tracking activity, but not outcomes. So we know how long it takes to recruit, end-to-end recruitment process time, or we know when the advert went out, we know when we hired this amazing unicorn. However, how successful was the hire? How great was the experience? So you see that a lot of times threading it through doesn't always happen. I see a lot of HR metrics that are really impressive, but then don't influence. It looks really good. I'll talk about vanity metrics in a minute when we move on, but I'm thinking, okay, cool. So this is great, but what's the problem it's trying to solve? We'll talk about that. And it also exists without a clear business purpose. As I said before, that ability to transcend just the reporting to becoming a driver of strategic workforce decisions, that's where the magic of HR metrics is. And moving us along, what does it really look like when it's strategic? Again, decision oriented. It has to be clearly linked to outcomes. It has to change behaviors. So say I can track my end-to-end recruitment process, and I know how long the advert was out for. I know how long it took before we interviewed, onboarding, and we've got the magic person who started in the role. And I see that I have a long end-to-end process time. Is there any way that I can optimize or do things quicker or more efficient? That is a change in behavior that the data that I'm getting helps me to achieve because I'm able to see the data. And it also strengthens HR role as a strategic partner. And then I'll talk a little bit about credibility as well as we move along. So why do we even bother? I think I'm excited about HR metrics. I think a lot of people are. And it really makes a difference. Again, it helps to shape attention, behavior, and decisions. We're not just measuring metrics for the sake of measurement. It should be informing decision making. It also signals what the organization truly values. I can walk into any organization and say, give me your slate of HR metric, and I'll be able to tell you what is valuable to them. You know, are they measuring engagement surveys? But then what are they doing with the data they're getting? It gives you a very strong flavor of what that organization truly values. And also, it doesn't just track the strategy, it can help to reinforce the strategy or to distort strategy as well. So think about all the great nuggets that Wylie shared around the strategic workforce planning, and then you plug in data into that, and that ability to make a decision around what are we doing with our skill mix? What skill mix do we have? Well, how are we using? Are we buying? Are we borrowing? Are we building? Again, underneath all of that is the data, and the right metrics can strengthen HR's credibility and influence. So, I mean, I always joke, I'm like, HR is not a fluffy function. You know, gone are the days where it was a personnel, function where we just, hire and fire. There's so much more credibility that the HR profession brings to strategic conversations. And then the data, oh my God, is like the cherry on the cake that just brings the magic so that we're making data-informed decisions, evidence-based decisions. So I threw in here Lola's golden question. So I always get asked, what kind of data should I be looking at? And Wylie made a really good point when she said, we're thinking about the solution, but we've forgotten what the problem is. Essentially, the golden question in my mind is reinforcing what Wylie said. And that is the most important question. Before you decide what the right set of metrics is, my question to you is, what is the problem you're trying to solve? Sounds so simple. You walk into some organizations, they have like a whole plethora of data, and I'm thinking, okay, cool. So what is the problem we're trying to solve? And so that the right metric is the answer to that golden question. And once you can start with the question, it helps to inform everything else. And in addition to that, HR metrics shouldn't just respond to curiosity. It should respond to operational risk, strategic concerns. That's when you get the richness of the data. So again, if anyone is thinking, what is the right set of metric? Or you have a slate of metric already and you just want to do a little bit of an audit. Again, the question is, go through it line by line. What is the problem we're trying to solve? What is the problem that this data gives me the answers to? And then you'll get into the point where you're hitting the right metric. So examples of the golden question. Are we staffing safely rather than how many people do we have in the building? What is the skill mix? Again, are we staffing safely depending on what kind of business we're in? Are our people engaged? And why does it even matter? So a lot of us measure engagement scores. We think about, the Net Promoter Score. There's a lot of research out there now about, the efficacy of the Net Promoter Score. I would say don't take it in isolation, take it with everything else. But then even like the completion rate, I was at a conversation and they were like, oh, 50% of people completed the survey. And I said, what was the end? How many people? And they said 4. I said like 2 out of 4. I was like, okay, 50% sounds a whole lot different from 2 out of 4. But again, thinking about the golden question, but drilling it down a step further. Do our people have the right tools and training to perform effectively? Is our workforce, is it diverse? Is it reflective of the customers we serve? Why is this even important? What are the workforce risks that are emerging? Strategic workforce, like Wylie talked about earlier on, is it that ability to have, the right skill in the right place with the right tools? Again, my encouragement here is think really deeply about the golden question, and then the metrics will follow. So I want to talk a little bit about vanity metric. And honestly, it is what it says on the can. It looks pretty, but it doesn't do much. So vanity metrics are often, they're not tied to any clear business question. We just have the metric and you're thinking, what is this even measuring? Why are we measuring this? Why do we want to know that X number of people have done Y? It looks impressive as well, but it doesn't really drive change. They're chosen because they're easy to access. I see a lot of times where an organization is tracking, where do they recruit from? What is the success rate of one recruitment initiative versus another? And it looks great. And that information is easily accessible. I joined the organization. I tell you where I got the vacancy from. Was it LinkedIn or was it on Indeed? But then why is it being tracked? And no one can answer. Okay, cool. So are we using this information for anything? Are we investing more here? No. Again, vanity metric. So they don't support organizational culture or strategy. I've seen a lot of organizations who, for instance, track workplace violence incidents. Very important metric to track. However, there's no strategy to address the results of what we're tracking. That in isolation is a great metric, but because it's not being used, it's not answering a question, it's not driving change, informing strategic decisions, or changing behavior, you automatically take this beautiful, rich metric and it becomes a vanity metric. And then sometimes they're just metrics for the sake of metric. You pick up the dashboard, you see like 20 indicators on there, and you're thinking, oh, okay, so what are we looking at and why? So again, I would encourage everyone, go back to your organizations, pull out your dashboard, pull out your corporate balance scorecard, ask yourself the golden question, but also saying, this metric, is it driving performance improvement? Is it driving outcome change? Is it driving a change in behaviors? Is it driving decision making? So I threw in here a couple of vanity metric examples. So engagement scores. Oh my God, most organizations track engagement. X number of people would recommend Y organization as a place to work. And then you go back and you say, okay, cool. So you've got in the metric, where is the action plan? And it's crickets. I'm like, why are we tracking this? Training hours, but no evidence of capability change that is measured through performance appraisals or through transfer of learning. And then it just falls over. And we see a metric, oh, this organization had 500 hours of training. And then you think, okay, so is the training actually hitting the mark? And it just kind of falls off after that. Time to hire without quality of hire. So I've seen an organization where they say, oh, we're very, very efficient with our end-to-end recruitment process. It takes us this long. And then 2 minutes down the line, this person doesn't pass their probation or they don't settle in well into the role. And you're thinking, okay, so what is the quality of the hire if you were that efficient here? And then dashboard overload without any decisions attached. So again, really, really encouraging us to think about, what are we measuring? Why are we measuring? And are these vanity metrics or metrics for the sake of metrics? So there are some key metrics by functional areas, and I've thrown in examples here that I think we'll all be familiar with. But again, not all metrics are strategic. If you look on the screen, they're probably a bit more that could be measured, but these are just examples. So under recruitment, you can have like time to hire and, recruitment experience. Under disability and benefits, you can say, who is using our employee family support, labor relations, you can track all sorts of metrics under that. Offboarding, who's leaving, is that they regrettable, non-regrettable, and then the associated data, which can either be the anecdotal, the data, and the objective as well. So the key takeaway again is not all metrics are strategic, selection matters, and we'll talk a little bit more about selection in a minute. So we've got the second poll here. And so how would you describe the current maturity of people, metrics, and analytics in your organization? I would love to see the response. Advanced, they're embedded in decision-making, predictive models, dashboards are in regular use. Intermediate, sometimes we've got some dashboards, but they're not consistently embedded. And then basic, mostly descriptive, reporting focus, limited strategic impact. I look forward to seeing the results. Oh, this is interesting. So nice to see that a lot of us are using it here or there, intermediate. And for the folks who selected basic, oh my God, what a brilliant opportunity for you to do something more. And then those that are advanced, keep going, kudos, keep using the metrics in the right way. Okay, so I'll move this along. So the right mix of metrics, and sorry, I'm trying to decide a little bit. My screen has decided to do its own thing. So again, I often get asked the question, what is the right mix of people data? And the way I always like to portray it is, imagine you're having a balanced diet. You have a meal, you want your vegetables, you want your carbohydrates, you want your, I don't know what the other food group is, but you want a whole balanced diet. And so thinking about metrics, the balanced diet of metric, the right mix is leading, operational, and lagging indicators. So the leading indicators are the ones that predict future risk or opportunity, e.g., vacancies associated with critical roles. We need to know what these vacancies are. Wylie has told us so much about strategic workforce planning. You should be able to predict those to some degree of accuracy. Those are your leading indicators. Operational indicators are what is happening here and now today. What is your sickness absence in the organization? Rates of, what are the top 5 reasons why people are off sick? How long are they off sick? Essentially, it reflects current state of affairs. And then the lagging are your retrospective look back. So, e.g., time to hire end to end, reasons why people left. And so when you think about the right mix, your right cocktail of HR metric should have a good balance between leading, operational, and lagging indicators. And then using these to drive decision-making, we've talked about it already. So it supports evidence-based decision-making. So what roles are being hired into? Wylie has done an impeccable job in explaining all of that from a strategic workforce planning perspective. It should drive accountability as well. So the new hire turnover, if you're looking at your turnover and you see that a higher percentage of them are turned over within the first couple of months or even the first year, you want to ask yourself, are there opportunities with our onboarding, with the new hire experience? What is happening that we need to look at? Identifying workforce risks and capability gaps. Wylie has spoken to that already. Trends and informing planning around that predictability and generally improving organizational effectiveness. So now we have the data. How do we then move it to make an impact? So again, what decision did this metric inform? What, again, thinking about it from a strategic lens, what behaviors changed, what outcomes were improved, was the culture enabled, and how did strategy advance? So this is a way of going back to your right mix of data, your leading, operational, lagging, which are chosen based on your response to the golden question, i.e., what is the problem we're trying to solve? And then you look at it on how it's making impact. And then communicating. A lot of times organizations, they measure the data. They use it to make decisions. They know what the right mix is, but then it falls over when it's time to communicate. And so to influence, we need to communicate it in a way that it tells a story. There's so much research and evidence around storytelling. It provides context. It presents a clear argument. I should look at data being presented and know exactly what the problem is and what the ask is. Focuses on implications and decisions. Wylie talked about the burning platform earlier. Again, that is a way of storytelling and communicating data. Highlighting the implications of the trade-offs, which is, to Wylie's point, the cost of doing nothing. What happens when we do nothing? It should be credible, transparent, relevant, and easy to follow. If I could bold anything out here, I will bold out credible. The number of times the data has come to a table that I've seen or experienced or heard of, and everyone spends time, challenging the validity of the data, that we don't even make any decisions because it's like, no, it's off by X%. And where did you get that from? Where is the source of truth? No, I don't agree. One system didn't talk to another system. So data has to be credible, or at least be wrapped around an acceptable number of assumptions, i.e. margin of error. Okay, this is 98% correct. These are the cutoff periods. These is the calculation and the formula that we use, so that the credibility doesn't become a distraction, because I see that a lot. And essentially, leaders want answers to their questions. They don't just want dashboards, a little bit of help in storytelling and interpreting, and bringing it all home. Again, business question. Think about it. What is the problem we're trying to solve? Look at your metric and say, is this vanity metric, or is this actually driving an outcome? Think about your balanced diet of your metrics. You're leading, you're operational, you're lagging. Think about how we want to communicate it clearly. The number of times you've seen a dashboard or you've seen a graph and I'm like, you didn't even label the axis. Like, are these hours? Is this dollars? Like, what are we even looking at? Anyway, so it has to be clear. It has to be consumable. Strategic metrics, as we know, strengthens our credibility and our ability to influence. So I'm having a conversation with a leader and I'm like, hey, I think you really need to look at your onboarding training. And they're like, oh, no, why? Everything is fine. We're like, okay, well, we know the turnover within the first year is X. We know that the quality of hire is Y. We know the grievances are this, sickness, absence is that. Therefore, you need to look at your onboarding. And then it becomes a different conversation because we're able to drive that. We've talked about AI and analytics, reshaping workforce strategy. Oh my God, Wylie is the maestro. I signed myself up for her course. I'm just going to sit in the class and just listen. I don't know if she knows what she knows now. And really thinking about the ability of using AI. Again, like I said, 100% yes. And think about your governance frameworks. Think about your literacy and change management. Is everyone interpreting the data the same way? And always make sure that the human is always in the loop. Has to be a human in the loop. And the magic that goes on when there is a human in the loop, and then we're using automation as an enabler, not as a substitute. And finally, we thought we'll leave you with some reflections here. What set of people data does your organization have? What do you need to rethink because of what you've heard today? What sets will you commit to when you're evaluating or redesigning to better support strategic decision-making in your organizations? So a little bit of food for thought. And I believe that was my last slide. So I will stop share. And I think I did that successfully.
You did. Thank you so much, Lola. So we have some questions from the audience. So I will pose these and you and Wylie can decide which of you would like to answer, or maybe you both want to chime in. So first up, it's about how to overcome allowing data to be used in AI, as there has been some pushback as the data is sensitive and can't be shared with AI tools. Also, do you have any tips for convincing non-technical users in HR the adoption and use cases showing? Kind of a two-part question.
We can so when we're talking about, Todd, I think I might have missed the second part of that, but maybe I'll start with the first part around So first of all, and again, we could spend hours talking about this, organizations really need to do a better job of helping people understand what data can be used, why can that data be used, how are we protecting and managing the privacy that is required around data. So we need to do a better job inside our organizations really determining and deciding these things, because we don't have the guardrails in place, and then people move into this like super fear-based place of now we're not going to use any of it because we don't have any guardrails and we don't really have an understanding of what we can and can't use. So I think first and foremost, you want to go inside your organizations and start building out some data governance strategies, right? Like, what are those guardrails? We have access to use data to help inform decisions, to help, evolve our business. So we don't want to not use them. We just use data. We just need to figure out what the approach is to doing it, but also really making sure that we're managing the privacy component of that. Because the thing is, as an organization, you will get left behind, right? If you're not sort of moving along the bouncing ball with AI and the work that's happening with the technological advances, you will get left behind. Lola, what are your thoughts?
100% Wiley. What the only thing I'll add to that is in rolling out automation, let's not forget to look at it like any other change management initiative. You think about your awareness, you think about your training, you think about building up that literacy, putting the guardrails in place, like Wiley said about the governance frameworks, because people are still impacted. A lot of people come with fear, like, oh my God, are my job's going to be redundant? It's like, no, not today. But, not today. But thinking about it from a change management perspective, making sure the rollout plan is clear, it's supported. Where I often see problems is where those guardrails are not in place. There's no governance framework that tells us what we can and can't do, and where there's no definition on what good looks like, and then we've forgotten change management. So let's go back to the change management, those good old principles. What change management framework are you using? Are you using ADKA? You're going to build the awareness, the knowledge, whatever you want to do, but treat it like a change management initiative. And then with time, you can find out where the points of resistance are and how you can address it. But they're also, it needs to come from leadership as well. So a little bit of that.
That's great. I will move on to the next question. This one here, they're asking if AI is going to have the same level of effect on the trades. So they could say here, I can see how AI is changing how we are working administratively. We've got a bot now for accounts payable. But what about jobs that aren't sitting in front of a computer all day?
So for the research there is no crystal ball here, but the research that I've done says that all white collar jobs will be impacted. What we see is we're not seeing the same in the space of the trades. So and I don't know, Lola, if you've read or heard differently, but generally what I'm hearing is it's white collar jobs that.
Fully agree, Wylie. You're spot on. I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago. We had an economist come talk to us. I have a background in economics. I was loving everything he was saying. I saw a couple of blank looks, but I was like, I'm having fun. But then he said, he put a slide up and said, the only jobs that are secure are the trades. And this is a room full of HR professionals and executives. And there was this gasp, like, I was like, oh dear. But I think at the end of the day, that impact is not the same. To Wylie's earlier point, there's no crystal ball. It hasn't been mapped out already. It might have the ability to augment, but there still is minimal impact as far as we're seeing by research and trends on non-white collar jobs.
No, that's well said. And I'll just add, there's a billboard near my house from a local plumber, which I think is brilliant. And it says Chat GPT can't fix your toilet.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I thought that was well done. Next up, do you have any recommendations for tools that HR professionals can use? They're saying here, aside from Chat GPT. So what are some of the go-to tools that we should be looking at?
So again, I'll go back to the question of what is the problem you're trying to solve? There are so many tools out there, and I don't know that I should be promoting any particular one, but if you start with the question of what are we trying to solve, ChatGPT might be the answer. It might be Power BI. It might be other tools out there, but I think I would flip that question on its head and say, what is the problem you're trying to solve? If you're looking to do analytics, ChatGPT is not great for analytics. There are other things that you can use. Some organizations have Copilot already embedded in. I've used Gemini, I've used Power BI, I've used the good old stack tools on Excel. So again, it depends on what's the problem you're trying to solve, but also what investments is your organization able to make. If you had an endless supply of cash, you need to ring me after this so I can come, Wylie and I can come work for your organization, and then we can, build a blue sky. But in the absence of that, in all seriousness, it's what are you trying to solve? how are you able to invest in solutions? I've seen organizations use spreadsheets and they do it quite well. And so again, it all depends. There's no perfect response. It goes back to the question.
And I think too, Julius AI is good for analytics. So I've used Julius AI for analytics. And I think doing your research. So first of all, you always want to follow the guidelines of your organization. So if your organization says that the only tool that they mandate is X, you definitely don't want to be taking that information and plunking it in your at-home tool. So follow the guidelines inside your organization. I suggest you play around with all the different tools because everybody, like anything, ends up finding their favorite. So when we're in the classroom, we've got people who love Gemini. Then I've got folks who love Claude. Then other people really love ChatGPT. So the best way to kind of figure it out for yourself is to just get in there and play around with the tools and understand kind of what their capabilities are. Would be a suggestion. But then when it comes to your, anything work related, you got to stick to the policies if you have them, which hopefully you do.
No, for sure. Next up, you mentioned, and when they say you, I'm not sure if this is Wylie or Lola, so I'll let you determine, but you mentioned that AI world models are well suited to scenario planning and predictive modeling. For an HR team that hasn't used these tools yet, what's the realistic first scenario planning exercise to attempt? Any ideas on where to start here?
I think right now, so world models have not, it's sort of like that's going to be the next wave of AI. So most of us probably don't actually have access to world models yet. Use whatever tools you're using right now for your scenario planning. So you take whatever, if you've got Copilot at work, if you're using ChatGPT, whatever it is, take that information and just plunk it into whatever tool it is that you have, and it will generate those scenarios for you. So you don't need the world models to do the scenario planning. You can use whatever tools you have. Lola, what are your thoughts on that?
100%. I find Power BI extremely helpful for that predictive piece and Tableau as well. And then when you're thinking about it, to Wylie's point, play around, do a good old pros and cons. What does it do? What do you like? What don't you like? And the more you play around with an open mind, the more you'll find the ones that are easier. But then the other thing I'll throw in as well is when you're thinking about, oh, I like this, or this feels like a preferable tool, don't forget to think about interoperability, because tomorrow you're going to need that system to pull information from this system, and you don't want to compromise long-term interoperability for that short-term gain. So definitely play around, but don't forget interoperability, because otherwise you would have a manual introduction of a workflow where you're pulling this out and plugging it in there when they could have spoken to each other if we just thought about it differently.
Great. We've got some more questions coming in, some really good questions. I'm impressed by the quality and the quantity here. And I'm glad I don't have to answer them because these are tough ones. Next up, when HR data is messy or complete, which this person notes is the reality almost everywhere, how do you decide whether it's clean enough to feed into AI for workforce planning versus what you should hold off? We're worried about getting, some inaccurate advice because our data that we give it isn't right to begin with. So what do you do in that case?
Really great question. I would say wrap around a couple of assumptions around it. So margin of error is one assumption to wrap around. And then another assumption to wrap around is, where are you getting it from? Make sure that the owners of the data can reliably speak to the data. So this is where with HR metrics, I always say, HR is a do with, not a do for. We're here to support. So take the data back to the business line and say, hey, this is what your data looks like. Do you recognize this? Does it sound about right? Wrap some assumptions around it. When you put it into whatever predictive or analytical tool, this is where the human still has to be in the loop. You need to look at it and recognize what inferences are being made. Or if it sounds a bit dodgy, you're like, oh, not really sure about that. And then that's the power of the anecdotal piece. So you're kind of testing it along the way, but definitely wrap around assumptions, make sure that the owners of the data recognize the data. And then when you get those outputs or the analytics, make sure that you can explain those as well. Think about the time periods that you're pulling in. Sometimes if you pull in a particular time period, it might skew the data one way or another. For instance, if you say, oh, let's look at vacancy rates over the winter months, it might look and feel different than it did in the summer months. So again, make sure that you're looking at it from, and it's the principles of data diversity, which is a whole different conversation we can talk about all day, but make sure that your data is rich, you have a good sample size, and then you can start to wrap around those assumptions.
That's great. I think we're going to have to end it there. We're at the top of the hour now. So I just want to say thanks to everyone who took time out of their busy schedules to join us today. And a shout out to Lindsay, Wylie, and Lola for sharing their expertise. Just a reminder to everyone today that you will receive a link to the recording at the same email that you used to register. So keep an eye out for that. I think we've got that set to deploy on Monday next week. So on behalf of HR News Canada and our friends at Queen's University IRC, we wish you a safe and productive rest of your day. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.